And welcome again. So I'm really curious how many folks here were able to attend the Radically Rural Summit either in person or virtually? Got a couple at least. Steph, you kind of count. You kind of count. She submitted something for our livability slam and we were able to present that at the end. So you were there in spirit and we're very thankful for that. A lot of folks were really excited about what you're doing. So I'm happy now to give a warm welcome to the Community Heart and Soul team. It's so great to see folks from all over the country with their team coming here to join us and talk about a model that's working. As many of you know, Radically Rural is all about models that are working. We want to say, we don't have it all figured out. We have some things that are working for us that we're happy to share, but we also want to learn from other organizations and groups and communities too with what's working for them. So because Community Heart and Soul has been working for over 10 years, we wanted to hear about it. Why does this work? What are the principles we can take away and use in our own communities? And so the team has assured me that you will leave here with ideas and inspiration for your own towns, and they have made sure to keep the process interactive so you can all share and inspire others too, or your money back. Just kidding. So each Heart and Soul member will introduce themselves. And so without further ado, I will send it over to Judith Hull, who's going to facilitate today. She is a Community Heart and Soul coach from Sugar Hill, New Hampshire. Welcome, Judith.
Thank you, Juliana. I hope you can all hear me. And thank you to the Hannah Grimes Center and Radically Rural for inviting us to participate in this monthly roundtable. It's a great pleasure to be here. I am a Heart and Soul coach. I represent Massachusetts and New Hampshire, but as Juliana said, I live in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire, sort of way up north. Today, we have several team members in addition to myself. We will start off with Jane LaFleur, who will provide a great overview of the Community Heart and Soul model and tell you how it brings together small communities to improve their towns. Then there will be some specific examples provided by other team members. And these will be specific examples of towns that illustrate the 3 heart and soul principles that you'll be learning about. Following the presentation of each principle, the in-depth presentation, there will be opportunity for questions and discussion. And as Juliana said, our team is going to introduce themselves, but I know they join me in saying that we hope we inspire at least some of you to consider the heart and soul model for your towns. So Jane, let me turn it over to you to begin with the overview.
Great, thanks, Judith. I'm Jane LaFleur. I happen to be in Camden, Maine, but I work for Community Heart and Soul, which is headquartered in Vermont. I think right now I'll just let my fellow presenters introduce themselves, starting with Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Leitner, and I am working with Community Heart and Soul as a training director and based here at the office in Vermont. And I've worked with coaches and their communities throughout the US, and I'm really excited to share some examples with you today.
And then Kat.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Catherine, or Kat Ingraham. I am a Community Heart and Soul coach in Maine, and I've also worked as a project coordinator for a regional Community Heart and Soul project in Western Maine. I'm also looking forward to sharing some stories with you today and learning a little bit about where you all are from. Thank you.
And we also have Jen Danifo, and she's from Pennsylvania. I don't think she's on the call yet. So as soon as we see her, we'll call on her in a few minutes. I want to start by sharing my screen and introducing you to Community Heart and Soul, and make sure that I can see. Can you all see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So I want to talk to you about what Community Heart and Soul is, how it works, and what makes it unique. I'll talk to you a little bit about the origin of the program, what makes it unique for engagement and for community development as a community development model in your community. We'll mention the 3 principles and the 4 phases, and then we have case studies that the folks I just introduced will be talking with you about, following the principles of Heart and Soul from Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, and we'll leave plenty of room for discussion and questions and answers. So this is a quick video about the origin of Heart and Soul, and then we'll quickly move on to the next slides.
Community Heart and Soul is a field-tested planning method for small cities, towns, and rural communities, based on 3 powerful principles: involve everyone, focus on what matters, and play the long game. Developed by the Orton Family Foundation, Community Heart and Soul helps towns move toward a brighter, more prosperous future, rooted in what matters most to the people who live there. The seed for Heart and Soul was planted by businessman Lyman Orton, who, with his 3 sons, is proprietor of the Vermont Country Store. Orton served on his town's planning commission when it was wrestling with divisive development proposals. Orton grew frustrated that decisions being made that would shape the town's future were without guidance from the majority of the residents. There had to be a better way.
We call it Community Heart and Soul, guided by what matters most. What matters most to whom? To the residents, to the way people live their lives.
If our conversations focused on what matters most to our communities, then what conclusions would we come to about our town's economic development and the future of this area? Any community can just stumble into the future. We have a real opportunity here to seek out and grow in a way that reflects the whole community's values and ideas.
Almost any small town would benefit from going through a Community Heart and Soul process, because it brings the residents of the community closer together. And as they get closer together, the differences tend to fade away, and the things that they care about the most, the things that matter most, replace the differences. They become more trusted in one another. They become more collaborative in their decision making and in their discussions about their community, and they become stronger believers in their community. So people will continue to live there, new people will move in, and people will invest more in their community.
So that's a quick story about Heart and Soul and how it began. Heart and Soul is a field-tested model that's been over 20 years in the making. It's thoughtfully designed and tested in small cities and towns across the country. It's in action in 21 states now and over 100 communities. And you can go to our website to learn more about each town. Our newest states are Kentucky, New York, and within a few weeks, Oklahoma will be highlighted on our map. Heart and Soul is a way for people in small towns to rediscover what is unique and special about where they live. It restores pride in the community. Maybe a farm closed, or a development didn't live up to its promises, or maybe the divisions in town seem deeper than ever, or people and organizations with similar aims aren't working together as they could be. Perhaps some of this sounds familiar to you. Here's a photo from Galesburg, Illinois, where people in the community said, there's nothing to do in this town. What can we do? Everything costs money. And they put this chalkboard up, and lo and behold, within a few hours, it was filled with dozens and dozens of ideas of things to do, and really excited the town about their community and what the potential might be. So is community involvement and participation all that it could be in your community? Perhaps some of these pictures look familiar. Perhaps we're relying on public notices in a newspaper to bring people out. Perhaps you're used to people sitting up on a stage and maybe listening to the audience and maybe just a few people in the room. Or perhaps, as in the bottom right picture, you have plans that sit on a shelf. Or maybe there are developments that aren't looking like you expected after they were approved and built. But what if community engagement looked different? What if it looked like some of these photos, where there was active engagement? There were people that came out that normally were not involved, that new voices were heard, that it was exciting and fun. Community Heart and Soul is all about that. This is not a consultant that comes to your community. It's not a plan that sits on a shelf. It's a resident-driven process to engage the people in the community, to find out what matters most, and to build a future based on what people care most about. There are 3 principles, and we'll be talking about those in a few minutes. It's involve everyone, focus on what matters, and play the long game. And there are 4 phases to the Heart and Soul process, and I'll briefly talk about each one. This is a program that is resident driven. As I already mentioned, it's bottom up, not top down. It helps the people in your community come together in new ways to set a clear direction for the future and take action based on what matters most. In phase 1, the Heart and Soul teams are formed to build awareness and interest. People come together, we call it the core team, and they build awareness and interest and commitment from all segments of the community. They examine who is in the community and how to reach people, and how to we often talk about bringing people to your table, but instead we take the table to people in different parts of the community. We use a tool called community network analysis. This is where we identify, and the team identifies who lives, works, and plays in the community, and how do we reach those folks. So in no case does one event get everybody in the community. Maybe you're only reaching people of a certain age. Maybe you're not reaching young families. Maybe there are different demographics that you need different ways to reach the voices in those communities. So in phase 1, the teams are built. In phase 2, stories are gathered. We call this Connect. Lyman Orton, who was the founder of Heart and Soul, really believed in the value of story listening and story gathering and story sharing to share what matters most to the community members. And from those stories, we find there's data in the stories, and we find what matters most. In phase 2, Heart and Soul statements are devised that represent a summary of what the hundreds of people told you in their story gathering sessions, whether they're a one-on-one session like the upper right-hand corner where a young person is interviewing an older person, or whether it's a group story gathering session, a story circle of some sort. They could be a story booth at a fair, or it could be at some other event that's happening where we start to listen to people, gather their stories, listen to their stories, and share them back out into the community. Here's a fun way to collect data from a demographic that you may not normally hear from. In this community, they found out that they weren't reaching a group of young people, the 20 and 30 somethings. This also happened in Western Maine, in the Mahoosic area of Western Maine, in the Bethel area, where they developed beverage coasters that they would leave at area restaurants and bars and pubs and say, what do you love about this community and what would make it a better place? In this case, in North Fork Valley, it was, what do you love about this place and what would you leave? And they developed a beer called Love It or Leave It. So that kind of engagement, this is data from the community that picked up a different demographic that may not be heard from other times. So from those stories, Heart and Soul statements are developed. That's from the data in those stories. And those are summary statements of what matters most to the community. Also, then in phase 3, an action plan is developed. Again, this is a resident-driven action plan to guide the future in the community. And it's not necessarily what government can do for the community, but it may be what community members can do for themselves, or what organizations in the community can do for themselves. This action plan is often integrated into a comprehensive plan or into other planning documents in the community, whether it's a recreation plan or an economic development plan. Then finally, in phase 4, the Heart and Soul statements are officially adopted by the city and town councils or the select boards. They're incorporated into the plans, and they're used to guide future policies and decisions. We've seen many, many outcomes from Community Heart and Soul, and these are just a few of them. New leaders and volunteers emerge. Often we see that people get engaged in Heart and Soul because it's new and it's different and it's fun, and it can be short-term projects they get involved with. I remember a community of Gardner, Maine, who did Heart and Soul, and there was a new young mother with several kids, and she couldn't possibly serve on the planning board or the comprehensive plan committee, but instead she got involved in Heart and Soul, and it was a way that she could help collect stories from folks in town. She went to the playground on Saturday mornings with her kids and talked to other parents and got the kids involved. And I just heard last night she was elected to the school board. So this is a great way of getting new leaders and volunteers involved. There's other outcomes from Heart and Soul. Pride is restored, history and culture are honored, downtowns are energized, and trust is built. All of our Heart and Soul towns are featured on our website. And if the town has already gone through all the 4 phases, there's also a town profile, such as Bucksport, Maine has a town profile. So that's it in a nutshell. I want to turn it back to Judith, and we'll be talking with you about the 3 principles of Heart and Soul and illustrating those. My fellow presenter, Sarah Leitner, who's the Senior Director of Heart and Soul and an Iowa native, Jen Danifo with Pennsylvania Humanities, and Kat Ingraham who's working in Maine and Massachusetts.
Thanks so much, Jane, for getting us started. And I wonder, Sarah, we want to take up the principle that we focus on what matters most, that we allow towns to stress the positive rather than begin the process with a series of, oh, we want to do this or we want to do that might be divisive. Instead, the focus is, as Jane has explained, on what matters most. And Sarah, maybe you could speak to some specifics here, and then we'll see if we can see from the audience a little bit about what you love about your communities.
Thanks, Judith. So I wanted to say one thing before I start here, that I am an Iowa native. I do live in Vermont, but I am going to be talking about a couple of communities in Western Iowa, which is the area of Iowa that I'm from. These communities are coached by a coach who is based in Western Iowa. And so I am, working to tell her stories as the coach and about the communities where she has been working. And so Judith, just to talk a little bit about your question about the Heart and Soul principle, focus on what matters. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a community in Western Iowa that has a population of less than 500 people called Macedonia, Iowa. And Macedonia just started Community Heart and Soul, the process, not that long ago. They really had their launch this summer. And one of the things that is really part of Macedonia's history and culture is that they're part of the original pioneer trail out to the West. And that's something that, their population is small, but it's something that they are very proud of, related to when Jane was talking about the different outcomes that we often see in Community Heart and Soul, history and culture being honored. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about even Macedonia's Community Heart and Soul logo, focusing on one of the things that matters to them is their history and their important place in the history of the West and of Iowa. And so I wrote down the tagline to their logo, which is saving our history, building our future. And Macedonia had their Community Heart and Soul launch this summer at this year. Every summer they have an event called Doni Days, and it's an opportunity for everyone to come together, celebrate their small community, celebrate the history of their community. And this was also the place where they really did this public launch of Community Heart and Soul this year to bring everyone together. I mean, everyone comes together anyway, and what a great opportunity to launch Community Heart and Soul so everyone in the community could learn more about it, see where it is that they could plug into this effort for their community to continue to strengthen the fabric of their small community. And so that's really one of the examples of them starting off with this work, focusing on what matters to them, and, you know, starting off this great journey that they are embarking on. A lot of the communities that we're going to be talking about today are communities who've maybe gone through the community heart and soul process and are now embedding community heart and soul in the ways that their community does business, so to speak, after going through the model. These communities that I'll be talking about in Western Iowa are right in the process. They've just started, or they're just getting started on some of the things that Jane talked about with the phases of the model. But we're already seeing those principles come to life, like them choosing to focus on what matters to them. Back to you, Judith.
Could I add another story from Jen? I know if she could have been here, she would have. She was going to talk about a small win in the middle of Heart and Soul in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And during their story gathering, they learned about how much they were in a food desert, especially for low-income families. And one of the things they developed right in the middle of Heart and Soul, before they even finished, was they developed community gardens for people in neighborhoods that had a food desert and needed fresh foods. So that's an example again of hearing from folks about what matters most and implementing it right away.
Thank you, Sarah and Jane. So let me just ask the audience, if you were imagining a meeting with your town, with your community, what do you think you'd hear? What do you love about your community, and what do you think people would say in response to that question? Caroline.
Well, I know that the outdoors and outdoor recreation are huge here. We're in southern New Hampshire. I'm actually right next to Keene, where Radically Rural is held. It's just huge, and you can see it everywhere with the rail trail system where the old railroad beds have been converted. And obviously we have some great mountain ranges around us, but people get outside in lots of creative ways. And I think that comes up for all age ranges, which is nice. It kind of crosses that barrier.
Yeah, great. We hear that in many towns. It's good to have it reiterated. Anybody else? Be brave. Step forward. Do you have any questions so far? Do you all want to ask us some questions before we go on to the next principle? Michelle.
Can I add an aspect though? At least for the people who have a proximity to downtown, I hear a lot that they really value the fact that we have a downtown that is intact per se. We have a post office, we have banks, we have a library, and the fact that many of us have walking access to that downtown is very, very important. So I think that I know I hear that, and I have a feeling that we would in general hear that from at least a select component of the population.
And what town did you say you're in?
Keene.
Keene, okay.
As Carolyn mentioned.
I'll add another piece about that access to downtown. Heart and Soul often brings attention to the downtown because people talk about how valuable their downtown is to them. I know Chris Johnson's on this call. He's from Bucksport, Maine. Good to see you, Chris. And I don't know if you want to add something about what your Heart and Soul team learned about their downtown, or anything else about focusing on what matters.
Don't get me started, Jane, because you know I can't stop. But that question that you asked, one of the first things that came to mind was small town feel. Everybody liked the small town feel. That was a key element in the responses. And there were many other responses about, as Jane said, about the downtown. We were still cognizant of the surrounding town as well. And we did some of our neighborhood meetings at all around the outskirts of the main town. But I'll stop, but it's an incredibly wonderful program. And I'm just really excited for you folks to get going on it. So I'll be quiet.
I'll add one more piece too. Damascotta, Maine, when they did Heart and Soul, found out that the hospital that was within walking distance of the downtown did not have a safe walking link to the downtown. And so all the hospital employees said, we want to be able to walk downtown for lunch. We want to get out. We want to exercise. We want fresh air. So on and on. As a result, they had all that ammunition and data to support sidewalk funding with the Maine DOT. So that they were able to make that connection because of what they heard through Heart and Soul.
Great. So we have walking access, intact downtowns, new ventures that satisfy others come out of the emphasis on things that people love and want. So in the interest of time, maybe we should move on to the principle of involve everyone. And Catherine Ingram and Sarah, and I'm sure Jane as well, can give you some specifics about how towns have been able to involve new voices and a far wider selection of the community than is typical. So, Kat, we haven't heard from you yet.
Thanks, Judith. So I'm Catherine Ingraham, and in addition to working in Maine, I do also work with one town in Massachusetts. It is Winchendon, Mass. I'm not sure if folks here are familiar. They're pretty close to New Hampshire. And they lost their grocery store a couple of years ago, which for a town that has a lot of agricultural resources and small family farms, they suddenly found themselves as a food desert. So they decided to band together and to try to do something to figure out what residents needed, what residents wanted. And they formed this group called HEAL, which used to stand for Healthy Eating, Active Living, and worked to network some of the local farmers into places where people who needed food could get food. And one of the other programs that they started that's been really instrumental in their community heart and soul story gathering is a group that they call Youth Changemakers. The Youth Changemakers are a group of resident leaders that they start in 6th grade and they go up through high school if they choose to stay with the program the whole time. They do have to apply, and they make a personal commitment basically to being a leader in their school community and in their town as well. They have folks who volunteer, do all the videography for the groups, help organize meetings, help with childcare and organizing food for different things. And I just think it's such a valuable way to get younger people involved in community. It gives them a voice, it gives them an opportunity to participate. And in so many community engagement processes, younger folks are often excluded, especially when it comes to municipalities where it's voting and, you can't vote if you're under 18. So it's been just very refreshing to see how involved the kids in Winchendon have been in their heart and soul process. They also did this fantastic art project to design banners for their downtown, and I'll stick the link for that in the chat in case people want to check it out. So thank you. And Winchendon, yes, town about 10,000, so a little bit larger for community heart and soul. And they are in the 2nd phase, so they're still doing their story gathering right now. So not done, but working their way through. Thanks, Judith.
Thanks, Kat. And Sarah, back to you.
Yeah, so I want to share another story about the small community of Macedonia and what they've done to involve everyone. And then I'm going to shift up a little bit north and talk about another community. But I did put the Macedonia Heart and Soul Facebook link in the chat. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about something. And then if you want to later on, you can go check it out because there are some photos on there. So as I said earlier, Macedonia is really just getting started with community heart and soul. And one of the things that they wanted to do was really make a visual presence for community heart and soul right from the get-go. So people would know, what is this group and what are they up to? And show that it's not just about having meetings, but it's about being active and doing things. And so they came up with this great idea to paint and take care of some of the old equipment in their playground. And so they got a group together and they went out and they painted, one of these old kind of push merry-go-rounds, and they took their Community Heart and Soul logo and painted that on their merry-go-round as well. And then they used really bright paint to make a hopscotch on the sidewalk. And so again, that was just a great way, and what we call like an easy win, right out of the gate, a way to show Heart and Soul is here, and we're ready to work with everyone and involve everyone we can in these activities and these things for our community. And that visual was just a great way to get things started. And, so Kat was just saying that Winchendon is in phase 2. They're working on gathering their stories. Macedonia, I think it was last week, maybe Wednesday or Thursday, they just had their very first training for phase 1 to learn more about how they're going to get their volunteers together to gather the stories in their community. So they are just getting started in terms of that, how they are going to involve everyone to hear all the voices in their community. And then Judith, one just quick story too that I wanted to share about another community in Northwest Iowa called Akron Westfield. So Akron and Westfield are 2 communities. Akron is definitely the larger community. I think it has about, I'm guessing now, but I think about 1,500 people. And Westfield is to the west of Akron and has maybe around 400 people, but they are both in the same school district. And so they are actually working together with Community Heart and Soul. A lot of we often talk about who lives, works, and plays in the community. And for Akron and Westfield, that made a lot of sense for them to work through the Community Heart and Soul model together, because they do so much together, especially because of the boundaries of the school district. So one of the things again, this is the idea of that easy first win to make a visual presence of Community Heart and Soul. In the town of Akron, there was an empty lot, a vacant lot that had been in the downtown for a long time. And they just got a group of volunteers together, a lot of kids and other people, to take that vacant lot, put down some rocks and some planters and put some flowers in, and just make that into a bright spot in their community, something that everyone had stared at for a few years, this empty space, and just make it aesthetically into a place that was, a happy place for everyone to look, and a place for people to go and sit and relax. And that was really driven by, I think it was a 4-H group. It was a young group of kids in the community who made that happen. And again, they did that right at the beginning as they were starting with Heart and Soul. And it was just a great way to start involving people, to see this activity and to really get things going. So that's another example I wanted to share. And I feel like I could pop things in the chat all the time. I don't want to overdo that, but I will put an article in there about that project. Once I find it, I've got to look for it, but I'll share that with you as well.
I have one more story to add on the theme of focusing on what matters. And I probably won't do this justice. If Jen were here, she'd do a better job. But and this story is also on our website. It's a story of the Gumby sisters in Pennsylvania and in Mount Holly. And the Gumby sisters were African-American sisters who lived in this neighborhood, rural neighborhood of Mount Holly Springs. And the Heart and Soul coordinator, Pam Still, was told that they had an interesting story to tell, but they really weren't interested in meeting with her initially. And she really had to gain their trust to hear their story. There happened to be a pharmacist who knew both Pam and the Gumby sisters and said, you all should talk to each other and you can trust each other. And it was that connector in the community, and Heart and Soul is big on connectors, finding the people that can connect you to other people. And what she learned was there was this church called the Mount Tabor Church that had served as a very strong role in the African-American community in Mount Holly Springs. And it was falling down, it was dilapidated, and the Gumby sisters, Harriet Gumby in particular, was worried about sharing too much information about that church because she thought the government would tear it down. It was dilapidated. But because of the trust that was built and the story that was told, they found this church, they allowed them to see it. It was in the same condition that it had been inside from when it was closed down. It was right in the Gumby sisters' backyard. And they ended up opening it up. It was a time capsule to the time. And they started to focus on the physical restoration of this piece of history. There's a lot more behind this story, but it was not torn down. It was restored. It became a place to honor the history of that area and of the folks that lived there and worshiped there and were buried there in the graveyard. So, and that kind of honoring of history and culture is something that we've seen in many, many Heart and Soul communities. You can read that story on our website. It was written by Deb Fallows, who I think is also on this call. And I don't know, Deb, if you have a chance or if you're able to come on and tell us any more about that, if we have time, anything I missed, or maybe not.
Jane, I did stick a link to the video about the church from YouTube.
Great.
It's a couple years old, so it doesn't have all of the most up-to-date information. The story has been evolving, I guess, continually. But if people want to kind of take a look at what the church looked like before and after, that's a good resource.
Okay, and Deb is not able to, but I put a link to her story in the chat as well. That's on our website. It's just a powerful story. And again, this is one of our principles, focusing on what matters. And this is what mattered to that community. Thanks, Deb.
Thank you all. These are great examples of sites within towns that folks can see and even touch, and they're sites that therefore bring people together. And I'm wondering in the audience whether, as you've been listening, if you can imagine examples in your community, or what about imagining who you'd like to see more involved? That sort of leads to interventions, things that you could imagine doing, but who would you like to see? And can you imagine some of these projects? Anybody?
Or who are the missing voices in your community?
Who are the missing voices? Who would you like to hear from? Michelle.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to commandeer the conversation, but having had a year of experience in the high school here and a daughter right now in the high school, I truly believe that as a community, we have to figure out a way to reintegrate our teenagers back into our culture and our community in order to move forward in a healthy and safe manner, that we just have a great number of young people who are disenfranchised and afraid and fearful and are acting out, and I don't believe that cracking down on them is going to help. And every once in a while, if we could find a way to engage them, that there could be some potential wonderful benefit on many different levels.
Thank you, Michelle. I agree with you deeply. And I think these kinds of seeable, visible, touchable projects that Sarah and Jane and Kat have described are great ways to bring young folks into the community. Anybody else thinking of groups in your community that often don't have a voice? They don't come, they're quiet, they don't come to town meetings, or if they do, they don't speak up.
So I represent a whole school district area. So there's actually 12 communities that I work with. But as you're talking and looking at these photos, I can think of one specific community called Clyde, where they're already doing some of this work, but the flips, like they have great ways of bringing their community together already. But on the flip side, I was talking to one of their representatives who wants to quit because there's this great tension between the traditional agricultural community and new folks moving in who are not ag. And so bringing those two groups together in that community, I think would be amazing. I think they'd be a great candidate for
Yeah,
this.
conversations across those two groups.
We have similar challenges with those two groups. And what I have identified is that our elders have been very instrumental when you get to talk with them individually, because they're generally the parents still of the shakers, the movers and shakers who are in the community, and they still have some clout with their family. And they tend to be far more open-minded about the integration. At least we found that in ours. So, but they're also the invisible community members. And so for us, or for me, I think I would focus on them because their influence goes beyond just our gathering around the table. You know, they then go back to their own homes and they talk to their own families and the extended generations. And it's proven to be very impactful and healing in a lot of ways, but typically they're not invited to the table.
Great
Yeah,
point.
that points out the importance of the connector, finding the connector that, you know, someone on your heart and soul team, for instance, may not know that person, but the connector might, and they may be invited to their table rather than saying, come to our table. You know, how do you take the table all over the community with the connectors? Yeah, thanks. Julie,
I just thought of one other example. I mean, this is veering from what we were talking about in terms of the communities, but we have a colleague who was a project coordinator in North Fork Valley in Colorado. And she tells a story of this amazing, very similar thing about this divisiveness in the community. And they designed this engagement activity where they had young people interviewing older people, and it was this newcomer, what did they say? Newcomers and old timers. And they had videos of this and they put it into a big production. And then they had a grand opening or like a screening of it at the local movie theater. And I'm not doing the story justice, but I'm sure we have a link to something that describes it, but it was, you know, I remember her talking about how wonderful that was because so many voices all brought together in this one production, shown to the town in the town's movie theater. And there they all are sitting in the theater together to watch this, and how powerful that really was. So let me look for that story.
Thanks, Sarah. Juliana, I saw your hand up. Do you?
Oh, I was just going to say, as far as voices that I feel like are missing from the table, Indigenous voices are ones that I'm really interested in including and elevating as often as possible. And I know that I and our organization could do a better job of that. So that's something that I would say for us.
Thank you. Yes, agreed. Anybody else? So we have some examples, Kat and Sarah, of playing the long game and being involved, being involved ultimately through the generation of stories and statements in creating a plan and ultimately acting on it. Kat, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Judith. So as a project coordinator for a regional heart and soul initiative that was 5 towns that shared one school district in Western Maine. Each of the 5 towns was very distinct. And even within each town, there were particular neighborhoods or valleys that people were attached to. They weren't from this place. They were from like this particular hill, and their family had been there for 7 generations. So a lot of individual personalities. And one of the goals for them doing the project as a region was to start to shift the dialogue away from, what's this town doing? Town's not doing, into more of a regional cooperative mindset. And it took 2.5 years, of course. So community culture change takes a long time. And I guess that's not a super long time, but over the course of their 2 years of Community Heart and Soul, the select boards from each of the towns, which had never met together before, got together in January of 2020 and started to talk about ways that they can cooperate. Since then, they formed a regional broadband committee, and they're working on sustainable tourism initiatives as a region together in ways that they never would have before Community Heart and Soul. So it's been amazing just to see that transformation. When we started the project, one of the towns didn't necessarily want to even be part of it. They felt like they were more closely connected to other communities further to the south, even though they were part of that school district. But by the end, their town manager became just like the biggest champion for collaboration. And he's been absolutely instrumental and outspoken in their tourism and sustainability work. It was nice to see that shift from a non-believer in Community Heart and Soul to somebody who now, talks about how great it is to be able to share and work with other people and other boards. And I just want to, for folks doing community work, say that these things never happen overnight. So keep at it and be patient. And thank you.
Total conversion. Sarah.
Well, I just wanted to give a couple examples of how, the community heart and soul process can really contribute to playing the long game in other ways as well in communities. And so one of the examples is, again, from this community of Akron Westfield, who are in the process of building a new swimming pool for the community, and also have a school bond that, were questionable as to whether there would be support. That was the bond for the school. And again, we can't say it's only Community Heart and Soul, because obviously it's not, but just the idea of bringing people together, having people more engaged and involved and in what's going on in their community. That bond did pass in Akron Westfield School. A similar story we have from a community in Eastern Iowa, where just bringing people together, having people involved in the conversation about what matters to them with their community, it helps pave the way for other decision-making points for communities as time goes by, and really looking at all of the ways that just really good community engagement can contribute to the way communities work together, the way they make decisions. It doesn't always mean that it would be a yes vote. Maybe it would still be a no vote, but it would be an informed vote of people really talking and engaging on what the issues are and what they really care about. So I think, again, those are just two examples, again, from Iowa. I'm sure Jane has more examples she can give of just ways that, Community Heart and Soul helps to take all of the good things that people learn, all the great skills and practices that they learn through the model itself, through the process, and apply that to the rest of their lives as a community together, and helps as they're making decisions, as they're, living and working and playing together.
Now, the example I wanted to add again was not from Maine, although I'm sure Chris can chime in again, but in Meadville, Pennsylvania, and in other towns we've seen this, but because Heart and Soul gets people engaged kind of on their own terms with their own skills and abilities and where they want to play a role, lets them it's a skill builder in many ways. It's a capacity builder within an individual as well as within organizations. And we've seen people run for office that may not have had the wherewithal, the courage, the knowledge, the understanding of how their community works until Heart and Soul. And that happened in Meadville, Pennsylvania, where members of the Heart and Soul team ran for office and were elected to the city council. I think the same thing happened in Bucksport, Chris, where I know that Nancy, for instance, got involved with the library board. Maybe that was because of Heart and Soul, maybe not, but just so much interest in the community that is reaffirmed and grows and builds because of the light touch that it starts with Heart and Soul. Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, you're exactly right. And it developed a group of very skilled people when we started using the Google Drive system. And of course, I've shared that all around the country. I still go out and tutor groups on using it to get themselves digitized. Just one small part of the Heart and Soul process that we learned. Nancy and Valerie were on this library. They reinvented the Buck Memorial Library and got a lot of things done there. I got involved with the land trust here as well. So there's a lot of post Heart and Soul process that goes on, and it never stops. That's what's great about it. It never stops, and you're always going to be running into each other at certain times. One could be with one group and another with another group, but we all stay in touch with each other. And I was thinking the other day, somebody had told me they hadn't heard from us for a while, and I thought, you know what, that's a good reason to call the core group together and let's see what's going on. But all our results are posted on the town wall, the town council chamber walls are out there. Everybody knows what we've done. It's a wonderful program that pays back in places you'll never ever imagine. Every town will be different. We were talking earlier about the ones that we wish we had gotten, the various demographics. We really didn't do the poor or the disadvantaged folks as much as we would like to, because in the end, we asked ourselves, how do you identify somebody? How do you identify that group of economically disadvantaged? There are ways, we just didn't do a good job with it. The children were a prime example of difficulty because of transportation, getting children and getting them back home. The schools are quite structured. We had to work through that system as well. So there was a lot of pluses and minuses. But I can only tell you, a gentleman from Gardner told me when we started, it'll be the hardest thing you've ever done. And he was absolutely right. But it's also the best thing we've ever done. And our results will not be exactly like anybody else's results. And they're all different, but essentially they're all the same. You're building community and you're finding good things to share with others. And it goes on and on after the process is complete. You're just going to continue doing much of this work. And you have all that body of work behind you to show folks as well. So yes, thank you for letting me speak. But and you also have with Jane and with Kat and where is she? There's Sarah. Wonderful people that are very skilled and very talented in what they do. And there was great support from the Orton Foundation. It's a great organization, and I just wish I could be there to help as many people as I could, but I do talk too much.
Thank you so much. We're running up against the clock at this point. These are wonderful words to end on, but if anyone else would like to make a comment, if your thoughts in the audience, if your thoughts have been, inspired by what planning might look like in your community. But I love the comment about the transformative impact of Heart and Soul, not only in terms of specific plans, but in terms of community relations overall for the long term. Really important, and it's great to hear you speak to it. So, anybody else?
Thank you so much to the Community Heart and Soul team for being here with us and helping us, kind of walking us through your model and what's working for you. Your stories are so inspiring, and I know that all of us have probably taken things away that we can implement in our own communities. We had over 50 people registered for this session, so I think a lot of folks nowadays that are used to doing this are probably planning on catching up on the recording. So definitely your stories and interaction will be felt by a lot more folks, even just on this call. So thank you so much for your time and for everything. So it was wonderful to see the Radically Rural community again. Hopefully see some of you next month at our 7-week business lab guide course, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.